Welcome. I'm Tiffany Pewitt. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute for Diversity and Civic Life. And this is the second webinar in our Grounded Knowledge Project series. This webinar is locating community-based research and public knowledge, and we are so happy that you all are here with us today. I am going to turn things over to our moderator, but I'm going to make a brief introduction of him first. Our moderator is Christopher D. Cantwell. He's part of the Grounded Knowledge Project Working Group. He's also an assistant professor of digital public history at Loyola University, Chicago. He's a former museum professional, and his work explores the relationships between religious communities and public memory in urban spaces. He's written on the preservation of historic churches, the creation of community archives, and the collective memory of American evangelicals. And he's also engaged in a digital humanities project called Gathering Places that partners with religious communities to build a living digital archive of today's urban landscape. So Chris will lead us through the webinar and introduce us to the rest of our wonderful panels. So thank you, Chris. I'll let you take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. And thanks everybody for joining us for this conversation. And thanks as well to IDCL just for convening these meetings. I think it's a very important topic that is getting some much needed light, and I hope this becomes a springboard for lots of different conversations. So I am briefly, to start things off, I'm just going to introduce the participants we have today on a roundtable, but I'm going to keep my introductions very brief because I am the least interesting person on this call today, and so I just want to sort of get everybody into the queue. And then we'll launch into some questions because as folks talk more about their work, you sort of learn more about them. So I'm going to try to keep my introductions very brief. So moving in no particular order whatsoever, we are fortunate to be joined by Gianfranco Grande, who is the Executive Vice President for Partners for Sacred Places, the largest national organization dedicated to the preservation and stewardship of historic houses of worship. He has worked with thousands of community-serving urban congregations and built strategic partnerships with faith leaders, community leaders, universities, seminaries, public officials, and foundations. He has experience in managing large-scale fundraising efforts, and he builds out the partners' menus of services and implement its consulting arm. He's been awarded the Richard Nickel Award from the Institute of American Archivists, or excuse me, Architects, and the City of Chicago Excellence in Preservations Award. He was inducted into the board of sponsors for the Martin Luther King Jr. College of Ministers and Laity at Morehouse College, as well as serving on the board of chair with the Holocaust Museum in Indiana. He is the alternate to the president of the Council of Religious Leaders for Metropolitan Chicago. And his most recent appointment is to serve as a board member at the Museum of Eldridge Street in New York City, which is a fantastic museum. So welcome, Gianfranco.
Thank you.
Next, we also have Rebecca Kaufman, who is a historian, preservationist, and curator, currently serving as curator of religion and community history at the Chicago History Museum, where she leads the Chicago Sacred Initiative. Her interdisciplinary work is at the intersection of religious identity and the built environment, and it explores themes of tangible and intangible heritage as they are embodied in material and visual culture through place-based, community-centered approaches. Her graduate research centered on the sustainable adaptive reuse of multicultural, multi-faith heritage identities of religious buildings through New York University's London-based program in historical and sustainable architecture. Her research has been recognized, including by NYU's Gavin Stamp Award in Adaptive Reuse, a commendation, by the Society of Architectural Historians of Great Britain in 2020, and Architecture, Culture, and Spirituality Forum's 2023 Lindsay Jones Memorial Research Award. So thanks so much for joining us this afternoon, Rebecca. And then lastly, but certainly not least, we're fortunate to be joined by Teresa Smallwood. So Dr. Smallwood is the James Franklin Kelly and Hope Esther Kelly Associate Professor of Public Theology at United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. She earned a BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, a JD from the North Carolina Central University School of Law, a Master's of Divinity from Howard University School of Divinity, and a PhD from the Chicago Theological Seminary. She is the immediate past postdoctoral fellow and associate director of public theology and racial justice collaboration at Vanderbilt Divinity School. And she is licensed and ordained, serving most recently as the social justice minister at New Covenant Christian Church in Nashville, Tennessee. And so, as I hope you can see from all of our participants, we cover a wide range of institutions, institutional settings, as well as sort of professional pathways. But what sort of unites all of these, and what we're really interested in talking about, as Tiffany mentioned, is thinking more about how the study of religion can engage more in community engaged research, more collaborative shared authority projects, to produce what we're calling grounded knowledge. And so to kick things off, I thought the first question I could ask everybody would be, so how does grounded knowledge, as we've discussed it, or community engaged research show up in all these wonderful things that you've done to date? And as you share that, I was wondering if you could perhaps talk a little bit more about what inspired you to take on this work to begin with. So perhaps we can sort of go in reverse order to kick things off. Teresa, you want to lead us off here?
Absolutely. I grew up in rural agrarian northeastern North Carolina. And what that did for me is to help me be situated as a social being, understanding people's marginalized experiences in America. And as a result, then I've always been sort of keyed in to what happens to the little guy, so to speak. The way I got involved, of course, was through organizing, through protest rallies, through my work with SEIU, my work with activism. And then, of course, as theory began to really be seated in me, I came to understand what it means to really develop a theological resistance narrative. And that is primarily what has kept me in this work. So it's about consciousness raising, it's about being concerned about your fellow human beings, and it is about getting in where you fit in.
Great, Rebecca Gianfranco, feel free to jump in next.
Go ahead, Rebecca. We said we do in reverse order, so you're in the middle.
Okay.
Always in the middle, both times.
Yeah, I can't escape it. Yeah, thank you for the very kind introduction, Chris. And sorry for my pause. I was writing down those wonderful words of Teresa because those are such powerful jumping off points. I guess in my own background, I grew up with faith leader parents who started the community that they became leaders of. And that is one of those things that in childhood often you don't appreciate how much it's forming you until you're an adult and can look at it in reverse. And I think the pieces of that really have led me down the path I'm in now is seeing how people organize around something they really care about, and the adaptability it can take, and the fortitude it can take, and the coming together around a common cause. And so while, there are so many ways that can take place through a vocation, through a job, for me, I've also just got kind of an interest and passion in history. And so public history and finding the path to public history has been a bit of a long road. I started actually initially in environmental studies and concerns about environmental stewardship, and shifted my focus into history. And traditional art history just didn't feel like the right path. It felt too detached from a lot of the real on the ground things that I grew up around. And so finding connection through place has been something that's really important to me. And the process of adaptive reuse is really use-centered and community-centered, because you have to think about how people interact with spaces to really make it work, to really make it viable. And that's something that I could really cling to, that, like I said, art history feeling detached in gallery space, to then the places and spaces that these things actually happen in. And now public history has become a really nice marriage of those two things, where I get to connect people and places into their history and act as a facilitator so that people can continue to learn, grow, and understand that. Anyway, enough for now, but I look forward to continuing the conversation. Gianfranco, to you.
Thank you, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everybody. My story is a little bit different. I have a doctoral degree in history. I am originally from Rome. As you can see, this massive map is it's a map of 17th century Rome, my hometown. So when I came here in the United States in 98, I have absolutely no idea of a lot of things. And for me, house of worship, churches, synagogue, temples were often just matter of art. They were beautiful buildings. And I never really thought about this the community engagement, the peace, the anchor in a community oftentimes is a house of worship. And later on, discovering all the services and ministries that this congregation offered to the community, it was for me one of those aha moments that I understood they're not just a place of worship, a spiritual refuge, so to speak, but really community anchor. And if they would go away, people would suffer. And that's what, inspired me at the beginning, and 25 years later, something like that. It's one of those great love of my life, and it's still there, and still like to explore more and more and learn more and more.
Great, thank you all so much. I mean, I think it's interesting to see that, while the three of you are all in very different institutions, it feels like there are some similar pathways in terms of seeing the relevance of your work show up in multiple ways, not only within your discipline, but also within the community that you find yourself. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, what are some of the unique benefits and insights that can be gained in doing research on religion with communities as opposed to about communities, right? And and what are the outcomes and what comes out of this work? Is it publications, or is it other forms of knowledge that are generated from this? And I think I'll just let you guys dive right in. I mean, whoever wants to talk first can go right ahead. I guess you can fight it out.
I'm gonna fight. Teresa, why don't you lead the way again? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm afraid you were muted. Okay.
I do that a lot. One of the things that I believe connects us very well, particularly as I think about these particular conversation partners, is the fact that when people go through trauma in community, lots of times they are met with the need to think about what can be salvaged, what can be held. And in my particular case, the grounded knowledge work that I want to highlight today has to do with a community that was completely traumatized by two different things. First, a tornado that came through and destroyed a church or two churches and a whole neighborhood, and COVID-19 and all the protocols that shut down the city in Nashville at the time. What I learned, though, is the resilience of people. Now, the church that I'm speaking of had been moved once before because of eminent domain. And so this was a community of folk who, after 100 years, is now being displaced again. But what I learned about how they wanted to salvage some of the stained glass, some of the bricks that had been actually forged by people 150 years beforehand, what I learned is that those kinds of artifacts, the capacity to hold them, holds knowledge. And it's that grounded knowledge that helped us really begin to put the pieces together to cause that particular group of faith-based folk to hold their community together, even though they didn't have a building, and to reach out and continue to be the church in its community.
I guess going in our order, that puts me next. Yeah, so this is a really expansive question, so I'll try to be succinct. But my title is Curator of Religion and Community History, and I often say those words are as big and expansive as you think they are in terms of what that could mean in a day-to-day setting, because everyone will have a definition of what those mean to them, but you might not find the same definition amongst any two people. And so kind of through that lens, working in public history, I often say public and community are not the same either, and that's very important. So we are perhaps a different museum in the mission of being a public history museum as opposed to other forms of museums. But we still have the work and legacy to uncover that has to do with what it really means to be in community or in conversation with those that we represent. And so being place-based, being city-based means, there are some definitions that help us guide around that. We can center Chicago-based stories as a part of that, but that still doesn't really give us definition for what community truly could mean. And so, for me, how we cultivate these partnerships or how we build that reciprocity, how we look at what those benefits can be, I mean, that can change on a daily basis. It can change on a conversation. It can change within the course of a single project multiple times, because we are in that conversation and we aim to be in conversation as we go. And so, for example, an exhibition we're working on that opens in 2025 is called A Key in Chicago, which is centered on Latinos' histories of persistence and resistance in the city. And the exhibition starts from the framework that we were protested in 2019 by high school students who came and didn't see themselves represented in our galleries and said, hey, we're a third of your city and we're not here. So if we come to a field trip to learn about ourselves, it's not happening. And it takes a lot of fortitude for high schoolers to do that. And it also takes a lot of accountability for a museum to respond. And so those are the things that lead to these kinds of projects of saying, hey, if we're called to account, how do we respond to that accountability? And in this instance, it's now a project with a lead curator named Elena Gonzalez, who's a wonderful colleague of mine. And we have community advisors, we have an awareness council that works very closely with us through each step of that process, because we want to ensure the stories that we're telling are the stories that they want told, in addition to, all the other things that we could do. And so, yeah, there's the benefits of working like this is that we get immediate feedback, and that often can mean the humility to take immediate feedback. I'm thinking of a blog post I might publish that, the family literally will tell me, hey, you got this detail wrong, you need to fix it, which is great because we're working with living, active people, and that's the goal, and that's what I hope makes us distinctive. Okay, more later. Sean Franco.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yes, I mean, to me, preservation is, and there are lots of people here that in one way or the other interested in preservation. Preservation is about the future, it's not about the past. It's learning about the past, preserving it for the future. And my scope of work is national. So we work everywhere. We have worked everywhere in the country, in Canada, and in Europe as well. One of the things that makes me feel that this grounded knowledge that I've acquired in this almost quarter of a century is not important. Important is not the right word, but it's necessary. It's the fact that this community, like I said before, really are this congregation, this building, are not an albatross around anybody's neck, but rather are community center, anchors, place of refuge in many, many different ways. And I think there are aspects on our work that we have pioneered, like creating an economic impact of these places in their respective communities, big cities like Chicago, New York, or small town. It's really important to show to the world that those buildings and those congregations, their role is way underestimated. There is this big misconception in America between the relationship with faith and state, so church and state, so to speak, that is misunderstood and is used sometimes for political agendas. Those buildings, those congregations are helping people. If they go away, who is going to help those people? And in many cases, and I just don't think, I'm not just thinking about the Upper East Side or very wealthy neighborhood, Gold Coast in Chicago and so forth, Belmead in Nashville. What about the other neighborhoods where people really are struggling? And so we found out, thanks to a study that we have conducted in collaboration with the University of Pennsylvania, interestingly enough, not the School of Religion, but the School of Social Works and Public Policy, is that the economic impact this congregation had is in the millions. Okay, the highest number that we record is 33 millions in North Carolina, in Asheville. So basically, this is real money that this congregation, thanks to their ministry and programs, are giving back to the wider community. So to have knowledge of all these mechanisms, of just go beyond the facade of things, is really, really important and can be very helpful. I like to think of ours as a movement, a gentle kind movement that is trying to make a difference. And we're organizing, in fact, we have a national convening in April in Philadelphia, where the major funders from Gretzky to Ford to MacArthur's are going to be present with so many other guests to really focus on the importance of this grounded knowledge that all we have acquired since we start talking about these things a quarter of a century ago, and transform it into something that really can still keep making a difference in the life of a lot of people. And when a congregation in the south side of Chicago, their economic impact is $2.5 million a year of real money. Okay, this is not the monopoly money. This is nothing kumbaya. This is highly scientific. This money going back to the community. How can anybody consider that building and that congregation a parasite, something that does not have a role in our sophisticated and new world? And many times those buildings are also beautiful. Let's not forget that too. So there's another reason. And just one last comment, Rebecca, remember when we met years ago, your first passion was environmental, studies. The greenest building that you have is the building is already up there, right? So there is also the aspect to things. So all these are different pieces of the grounded knowledge that we are trying to keep expanding.
That's great. That actually kicks off the next thing I was really interested in terms of the uses of this work and like who benefits and how you sort of allocate the benefits of community-based research. And so I was wondering if you all could talk a little bit about how you go about the work of cultivating the relationships that are required for this kind of work. How do you make sure that they're collaborative and there's reciprocity involved and that these are not sort of extractive relationships? And then sort of in addition to this, I guess as Rebecca said, I like to go big and then you can sort of find the answer you want to give. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit like what is the role of the scholar in that relationship, right? Because there is the integrity of our disciplines and the needs of the communities we work with. And sometimes those two things can align, but sometimes they can also be at odds. And so I'm just wondering how you build relationships that are reciprocal and attend to both of those needs. And so I think I'm just going to make Rebecca go first since she's been in the middle both times. So go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, because this is a small question to answer right away. No, this is great. They're excellent questions and absolutely have relevance in museum work. They have relevance in a lot of the work I've done. And as a little bit with the answer I gave before, it's a lot of thinking about where your accountability is, because accountability comes at a lot of levels. And if we were to say that, your question of reciprocity, I think in museum collecting, I try to use the framework of co-stewardship a lot, instead of ownership, we're co-stewards of history, knowledge, physical objects, because I think that places accountability beyond ourselves in the work that we do. And so it is something to have to work through a contract that defines where that line falls in terms of, legal responsibility, but intellectually, we are co-stewards absolutely of the things that we say we care about, because what is our history if we're not in community, in conversation, in knowledge with the people whose history we steward? And simultaneously, what good is it to have it if they don't know we have it in our institution? It doesn't feel like that would be any form of relevance or justice to why we'd have it in the first place. So within Chicago Sacred, part of the initiative that we have is a massive inventory of our collections. So Chicago History Museum has, I think it's 23 million objects in our collections between on-site and off-site storage. And it's, let's say my beautiful task to get to help facilitate an inventory to understand our collections ability to speak to different community identities across a lot of different lines. And that could be a religious or faith tradition, that could be a racial ethnic tradition, that could be geographical location, because how you define community has a lot of different lenses. And the goal for that is to basically say, what do we know we have? What do we think we have but could do better about understanding? And then what are the things we don't have, so we can identify gaps and think about a best and most equitable process for addressing those gaps. And I don't know that collecting new objects is always the way to address equity. It could be relationship building, as you're saying, Chris. And you'd also be amazed at how many things can tell more stories than you tell about them. You know, that's an example of, in the museum world, a term called metadata, which is just what are the things you're associating it with that maybe actually has another story. And so for me, like, adaptive reuse was a really interesting way of addressing that, both in a historical lens and a practical lens, of saying these spaces have transformed over time, which means they have a lot of connection to a lot of different people in a way we may not have given credit to. And one of my areas of extreme interest is a religious building that was built with one community in mind, but actually was preserved, maintained, stewarded by communities who were never lifted up as the significant part of its history, and ensuring that those are given equal weight because they all inform why we care about it, why we know about it, why it's a part of our history today. And so translating that into a tangible action, especially as a museum, that can take a lot of different forms. I think the thing people think of is, oh, you collect objects and you do exhibitions. And yes, that might be true. But we also do a lot of programs. We do a lot of site visits. We do a lot of phone calls. We do a lot of listening. I try really hard to, when I first try to meet somebody, I don't try to meet them for the first time because I need something for an exhibition, right? Just saying, hey, I'm here, I'm a resource. If you're looking for something and you're not sure how to approach it, come find me. Let's talk about that. Maybe we have something that can help you tell that story. And so, just trying to say that museums don't have to be institutions arm's length away. They are something you can be a part of, and trying to act as that bridge could be something a role like mine can do at museums beyond kind of what a curatorial lens is assumed to be. Okay. I don't know which direction to go next, because being in the middle. So do either of you want to take the mantle next?
Chris, you opened the Pandora box when you had Rachel. So why don't you have this time Teresa being, in the second, and then I go last again, and then we can change format for the next one.
Yeah, it's no problem. I'm very inspired by that last statement, and I think in my own experience, the role of the scholar is no different from the role of anyone else who would find themselves in the vanguard in the process of helping communities survive, thrive, and do what they do. In my case, I invoke sort of the title of Howard Thurman's autobiography. How do I do it? I do it with head and with heart. And this notion that scholars have something special is only because we have gifts that can be brought to the table. Right. In my own case, when I got to Nashville, the school that I worked for was really not welcomed that well by the community because it saw it as an institution that didn't give back. And so it was my job to try and build that relationship, to be another set of hands, a good thinking mind, and a committed soul to the work the community needed. And what I found is that I cared about things they cared about. So it was not hard to show up when they realized that they were the most policed area in the whole of Nashville. It wasn't hard to figure out how to do door knocking, to get a ballot measure on for a change of charter, because there was the political will, and I could tap into what was there and help strengthen it based upon my own skill and talent. And the other thing that I find is that when we are in that capacity to really build relationship, not just talk about it, but to build relationship, then people open up and you find that narrative that no one knows. And when you're willing to sit with folk, to do ethnographic work that is critical ethnography, you find that stories can be a source not only of freedom, but a source that allows people to see themselves in others. And that's what builds community. When the community can feel as though it really does relate to the people who show up, then you can get done some of the most amazing things. The thing that primarily inspired me in this was that I saw the commonality of disparities in these communities. And because of the commonality of disparities, it wasn't hard to connect the Latinx folk with the Black folk and with a lot of other people who I didn't even know about.
Right.
And once that happened, relationship happened. We learned how to cross borders, not to offend, but to appreciate. And I have to say that as a result, then, me as scholar, I was able to help them find ways to bring funds into the community they would never have had an opportunity to get. Why? Because I put my head and my heart in it. And during that COVID period, when the CARES Act money was flowing all over the place, they would never have gotten it had we not been willing to work together. And so our testimony now is that we distributed over $1.5 million of that CARES Act money to people who were absolutely in desperation.
Beautiful. That's the problem with to be the last one to talk. You have to, you get inspired by the words of your colleagues, but then you have to restructure the way you're thinking. So thank you, Teresa, because that's what you made me do now. And to me, the role of the scholar also is a role of great responsibility, because you need to share your knowledge, not share your knowledge for your own benefit or your own glorification, or to show to the world how many things you know and you are the greatest gift to mankind, but rather that you are the first servant of the people that with whom you are sharing this particular knowledge, especially when you work in places that you have never worked before. And I was listening, what Teresa words about learning about the Latinos community, and as well, the African American Black communities, but other communities. Right now, for instance, the team in this last couple of months, sadly, has been, again, Israel and the Palestinians. And like so often nowadays in this particular country, everything becomes so divided, where instead there should be a moment where the scholars really helps to bring people together and to discover things. I'm working on a project that I found extremely fascinating, and I hope it moves forward. Although usually I don't do a certain type of project anymore because I have more an overseer responsibility. There is a synagogue in Washington, in Seattle, Washington State, that is trying to form a space sharing partnership with a mosque. And so I'm working to bring together a bunch of Jews with a bunch of Muslims to use the same space. As a scholar of these things, and to use the word scholar, because for me it's too much, but let's say that's the scholar word, is a great responsibility. And I do this with great humility, because my goodness, just think about this, is in this particular day and age is really important. So how you do it in fostering those relationships, investing yourself in a little piece of your soul. Sometime when I spend session with communities, they might be community of color or community of different traditions, I get so tired at the end, because I really try to invest myself with them, to understand them, to share what I can, to learn from them, all these things. So I think responsibility, because we don't live on an ivory tower or ebony tower, right? We live together, and we all have the same blood, the same color in our blood at least, and so we're all the same. So there is that responsibility as well, but also humility. Humility to understand that higher is our education and higher and bigger is our position. Bigger is the responsibility to be servants of these people, you know. And I think it's personally for me, it always brings me back on the ground, always. And I feel very fortunate about these things, you know. And adaptive reuse, Rebecca, you referred a couple of times. Of course, it was partners like, you know, we were talking about this 25, 30 years ago already, right? Probably we're one of the first to really, in preservation, to talk about that. We are evolving this in now space sharing, you know, is really, and I love this because you really share the space that your ancestors or folks that came before you have built, and now it can be used by people of different traditions and different backgrounds, and you know, and that's always like a gift to see when those things happen. So responsibility, humility, and some wonder, I think, is really important. That's the role of scholars for me. And just get it easy. Just don't feel so special because you ain't. That's how I see it.
That's a t-shirt that needs to be made and worn at every academic conference. I think that's a solid line right there. But that, I mean, your story there, Gianfranco, is actually kind of a wonderful segue to the other thing I wanted to make sure that we talked about today. And you know, we've kind of lifted up and celebrated the kind of the joys and the insights and the impact that comes with this kind of work. But I also want to make space to talk about the kind of the kind of particular challenges that go with this kind of work. And I mean that challenges, that word challenges in a very capacious sense, like not only in terms of potential conflicts that might arise between communities or between institutions, but also the kind of like, you know, the funding challenges or the challenges of this work being legible to other folks in our field who might not do this kind of work. You know, Teresa, you and I have talked about the challenges of the loneliness of this kind of work. As much as it's collaborative, it can be very isolating sometimes. So I was just wondering if you could, you know, share what you found to be challenging in doing this work.
So, yeah.
You go for it.
I didn't pick somebody. Sorry, now it's just chaos.
Okay,
Teresa, go ahead.
Teresa, go ahead. And I will be second this time. So I'll be of my colleagues. Between
it's always easy for me to talk about challenges because from the communities that I've grown up and worked in, obviously we have some challenges. What I learned though is that the challenges can actually become stepping stones if you let them. So yeah, they always are worried about sustainability, about how you keep this going if you can get something started. Money is always an issue. But what I really had a problem with in times past was finding the political will. And that becomes, I think, one of the bigger challenges. People might be able to muster up enough money, they sell enough plates or whatever to get the cash. But then can you follow it through? Is there enough to just really make a difference, to see policy change? And that political will can get, you know, really stunted in its growth when you have, you know, one little blue section of a state and then everything else is red. So in our case, we put together a real strong program to get that ballot on the initiative on the that initiative on the ballot, and we won it with a landslide because they wanted community-based governance over the police. The area we were living in, the area we were working in and servicing was just over-policed. So we conjured up the political will to get that done. And then as soon as it happens, the state legislature just comes in and basically annihilates the process. And that, you know, that causes people, that's a challenge on many levels because you've already had to muster up the will and get people out to do the door knocking, to get the petition signed, to submit them in. And they're very proud of this. And then all of a sudden, the big arm, the big hand of empire comes and just seemingly shuts it down. But what I find is when you're in there with them and your testimony is no different than theirs, you can keep the momentum if you can keep hope. And I believe that the reward comes when you really understand waiting. My grandmother used to say this all the time. Good things come to those who wait. And what I found is that social change theory, the idea of how you make big things change, that is the long game.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot do that overnight. But if you're in it to win it, victory can be yours.
That's important. Thank you, Teresa. I committed to be second this time, so that here it goes. So I agree with you again, Teresa, the importance of working within the political system to make them understand certain things. But there is another factor that I found, at least in our own personal work, extremely important. As you have probably read in my, when you, Chris, with my introduction, you know, I personally helped to raise over $120 million. We have the largest grant program in America for congregations, over $60 million we are committed to give out. We have created and I'm very proud of this, a Black Church Fund. So we have a grant program for Black churches specifically designed for Black institutions. And now I'm creating a $54 million fund for historic synagogues. So why all these numbers, why this money? Is because, you know, John Lennon was wrong. I'm sorry, but when he said all you need is love, it's not true. That's a portion of it. Now you need a good check. You need a check so you can fix the roof. You can pay a good minister, right, Teresa? You can, you know, create a ministry, create missions, help people, and all that kind of things that comes with that. There is a lots of ignorance when it comes in terms of economy. I keep hearing this vulture talking about the world is about to end. We are on the brink of Armageddon. Nobody cares about anybody anymore. Well, that's not true. I mean, last year, according to U.S. Giving Institute, and for maybe our younger colleagues online that you don't know what is the U.S. Giving Institute, it is an organization that since 1956 monitor all the philanthropic activities that happen in America. So how much people give to what charity and to what missions. And last year, we're given about 490 billion with a B in charity, and religion is still the lion's share. It has the lion's share of this with about 1/3 of that. And so there is money out there, money that can be used to help people substantially. Now, the devil's advocate could say, if we could create a society where we don't build, you know, warships or you know, military things that cost billions, they're totally useless because thanks God we don't use them, you know, probably we would not have that kind of problem. But I don't want to open that Pandora box in this place. But to understand that there is money out there, to understand this money can be used to do actual good, is really important. It's very, very important. I'm proud of our national fund, which is the largest grant program for churches. So we are committed to give almost $60 million of money that we have raised to congregations that are doing community engagement. So not just the American Cathedral or Fort Presbyterian in Chicago, you know, or these beautiful places, but also the little church in you know, Latino church in San Antonio. Okay, there is one, the Divine Redeemer, okay, in the poorest part of San Antonio, and they get one of our grants because they are engaged with the community. So I think at times we need to be a little bit more practical and trying to do actual things rather than only talk about it. And that's been, again, that's very important, you know. And also, and I want to end with this, something that one time Pastor Moody he was the senior pastor at Queen Chapel in Chicago. Queen Chapel is the oldest African-American congregation in Chicago, started in 1844. And if you think the city of Chicago officially was incorporated in 1837, so was only 7 years later. So this guy is a wonderful man. And he said to me one time, you know, you give us money, but also hope. And that's something so rare today. I think that was a great message for me. And we all have a responsibility to give hope to people, the people that we serve, the people that we help. Because without hope and without money, life is really going to be tough. So that's what I want to suggest.
Wow. So now I'm in that awkward position of having to go third and trying to see what I can do that would be added value, because those were both really amazing approaches. Yeah, I'm just really reflecting what you said about tangible action. And actually both of you touched on the theme of tangible action that you can take. Because I think the role of a museum can feel very static if we let it. And I often hear the message that museums are about representation. And again, representation has its place and purpose, absolutely. But when you work directly with communities who are facing exactly the things both of you brought forward, and to be like, well, but I'm here to record your oral history. I'm sorry your roof is leaking. You know, that doesn't seem like enough, right? Empathy has its place as well. And I can be incredibly empathetic, but what are the mechanisms? What are the tools? What are the things we can do? You know, and that has a lot of weight, at least for me individually. And you know, that's an actual reference to, you know, roofs leaking when you go to visit. So that being said, I don't think, I know the question was about challenges, so I'll go towards the challenges and then maybe we bridge solutions if they exist. One of the things I was thinking about is, you know, often in museum work, I try to remind myself like what we do is not life and death on the one hand, you know, it has its place, purpose. But I'm not in medicine, I'm not in emergency care. So things that can feel urgent are probably disproportionately urgent to the real things people are facing. And so if we keep that like mission community oriented in mind, that what some people are focusing on probably has much more weight than a timeline in an exhibition, because the things they're facing might like look very different. That helps us keep people centered. To totally now go back against what I just said, you know, we are keepers of information and stories, however. And so, you know, to be life and death might not be the daily action of what we do. However, misinformation absolutely leads to death, right? Bias is a huge issue. And so if our role is to be keepers of knowledge and to ensure we're doing so equitably, we have our place. We absolutely have our place in these things. And, you know, I was, maybe it's a joke, but it's not, with a colleague that, you know, I think they hired me thinking, oh, we'll talk about churches and how beautiful they are. And instead, I'm researching genocide across 4 different communities right now. That's a life and death matter, right? That's what a curator of religion has to do too. So that being said, you know, there's a way we talk and present and bring forward that information that has its place, and maybe that role of curator is facilitator is really, really critical then, you know. So voice to issues is one thing, representation to issues is one thing. It's not directly being able to solve the problem of here's your roof money, but what I can do is say, did you know we have your architectural drawings? So when you go to apply for that permit, I can show you where they are, so then you can bring those forward for your application. Doesn't that streamline the process for you? You know, so just those little moments of knowledge that sharing I can do, I try to take to heart, so at least something feels tangible, something feels solution oriented. But you know, I will not discredit the place power or the power of representation can have in people's lives. You know, again, Latino students protesting a museum has now led to tangible paid internships. Well, they'll get job experience and guidance. So that has impact. You know, that has another form of reality in their life that perhaps we would not have had without some of these other steps. So yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of challenges in the museum world too, related to, you know, finances, stewardship, long-term sustainability of institutions, that I always joked like working in churches in transition was the best preparation for museums in many ways, and kind of facing how we look at relevancy and our role and purpose. But yeah, I'm just very inspired by the other two that got to speak as well. So I look forward to whatever next questions are coming.
I think it's particularly revealing that a question about the challenges of this kind of work, yielded some of the most inspiring answers, I think, of this afternoon in terms of just the viability and the vibrancy and the, I don't know, just the necessity of this work at this moment. That I thought this would be like, beware of this, but it became sort of like a call to action in these answers. So thank you for carrying that forward. I want to be cognizant of the fact that we've been going strong for 50 minutes now and been talking the whole time. So I wonder if it might be the time to sort of open it up to audience questions. So we just make sure to have time to hear from lots of different folks. And I think the group is not so big that we can't just let folks raise their hands on Zoom if they have questions. But you're also welcome to just type things in the chat, and I can read it out as well. I hope I'm not the only one spotlighted this whole time. But yeah, if anybody have any questions.
I have a question just to kick things off, and in part it's I know it's something that Teresa's definitely thought about, because we've kind of had these conversations before, but in thinking about this heart and head, and you're bringing your soul to this work and bringing your whole self to this work, I know that particularly when you're in these places where you're balancing a lot of institutions and challenges, that it becomes even more exhausting to keep showing up and to keep doing this work. So I'm wondering, for each of you, what is the other thing? What do you do to kind of take care of yourself while managing this work, or what boundaries have you had to set for yourself? And also, thank you just for everything that you've shared so far today. It's been lovely.
Well, I'm going to start, Teresa and Rebecca, because I never did it, and we need to be, fair. Elizabeth, I don't spread anything. I really don't. I just I don't think in those terms, and I feel blessed by the fact that I think I do the most beautiful work in the world, and this is a wonderful thing that, I'm lucky. And, I am also the reason of lots of anger in my colleagues, because given the fact that I do it, sometimes they feel compelled to do it, 80 hours a week. And somebody once said, just give us a break once in a while, just. So I think the connection with other people, with colleagues, internally and outside, is always refreshing, because it brings you back to the reality. But, when there is I don't see a time limitation or, a boundaries about passion and love. If you love what you do, keep doing it until you can walk, and that's how I see it.
I don't think I've been second, so let me try that for a change. I have had to learn how to take care of myself throughout the process of the work that is probably most highlighted in this instance. I've lost people to COVID. I've lost people to cancer. I've, had a lot of injury, and it's been difficult to turn the sort of spotlight back on me. But I've come to understand and know that for as long as I'm here in the earth, I care about people. And so if I want to see any kind of change come about, I have to keep myself healthy. I have to eat right. I have to watch my weight. I have to go to the doctor. And you know what else I learned? I like getting my nails done. I like, going out for a movie sometime. And it's all right, because we have to have rest as well as play in order to keep it moving.
Absolutely.
That was such an excellent answer. I feel like I'm between the two of you, where I absolutely agree. Rest has its place, and my problem is what I like to do for fun looks a lot like what I do for work. And so that I look like John Franco, where I'm just always doing the same things, because, my side project is my way away from the thing, but it somehow all came together again in my crazy brain. But that being said, maybe I'll address this a little bit from what I said before, but part of the work we do, in addition to how we think about the representation and facilitation of the stories, is I just hear a lot of really hard things all the time. And no one really taught me things like trauma-informed curation. And it's something I really wish I had known was part of the work of public history so often. And I jokingly said working in churches in transition was something that prepared me for that, and it's true. Probably being around pastorals who do pastoral care work better prepared me, because I just hear a lot of hard stories and there's no resolution. I can care very deeply about these matters, but I cannot resolve somebody's legal case for them. So I just have to sit with it at the end of the day. And that is still a very privileged place to be in comparison to going through it. But it doesn't change that that's something I live with very often, right? So human-centered work is still human-centered, and I'm also human, so having to create those boundaries. But what I will say is having a kid has helped me a lot, because he has a baseball team and I gotta go watch baseball games or whatever that role might be. And even that at least helps keep me in check to say, I don't have to do this for 18 hours a day. I can go make spaghetti and just let it live, over there for a little bit. And that's important for me. So not a perfect answer, but a real one.
Oh, by the way, I don't want that be misunderstood. Not that I'm this crazy workaholic that never does anything fun, and that kind of stuff. I have a lots of fun, guys. I'm telling you. I'm almost 6 years old, and I have so much fun, and doing other things that are not related to the work, but it's good to go back.
Any other questions?
I have one. Well, first of all, thank you all for sharing today. This has been wonderful. I guess I'm curious about how you sort of start projects, how you identify needs and how best to address them. I guess in ways that are mutually serving, but how those things kind of start for you.
I'll tap in on that one. I sort of skipped around some of the facts involved in my most recent work, but basically, we had a terrible storm 2 weeks before the protocols of COVID in Nashville. And I was working with these communities already because of over-policing and all the kinds of things that show up for activism purposes. Well, once you build relationship, when somebody goes through a trauma like that, then you have to sort of do a triage. And you're dealing with sort of the acute as well as how you can make things come about in the end. And what I found is that we were living in a food desert. We already knew it. There wasn't any real fresh food around. And folks in that community really didn't have any transportation. So out of the trauma, out of the complexity of loss, came a desire to figure out how to get them some fresh food, fresh vegetables. And we started a community garden. And out of the community garden came all kinds of things that allowed us to then begin thinking about how to use the land. You'd be surprised. I have some pictures that will just break your heart when you see little 3- and 4-year-olds pulling weeds out of some of our cabbages, because they were beginning to learn that early on where food came from. And that then generated conversation with local schools. Elementary schools started coming to the garden, teaching children about the land and about growing. The next thing we know, we're a part of a collective. And after the collective comes the capacity for us to do, sales at the local markets. So, that's just one vein, but you take it from just planting some seeds all the way to how you organize around that. That's how that work got going.
That's pretty good. Rebecca, why don't you go second?
All right, sounds good.
Go back to your in the middle thing.
That's right. Can't escape. I mean, so specifically within the context of a museum, we have our mechanisms and ways that projects come into kind of coming from the ideation phase into a physical process. I would say if we're doing that process well and right, it comes from close, careful listening to what communities are looking for from us, as it is with a key in Chicago. It could come from an internal identification of a need being filled. So like as an example, we're doing some interpretation around Emmett Till because Robert's Temple was recently designated as a landmark, and working with them as community partners in many ways and trying to think, what are, again, not every mechanism has to be an exhibition, but maybe exhibitions, maybe programs. How do we speak to the moment? And so institutions like ours are not particularly noted for their agility. So our reactivity time can be very long when it's something like that. An exhibition is multi-years of process and fundraising. It's a bit like building a temporary building, just it takes a lot of time to get there. And so trying to think about where something fits into the moment and how we can best address it is really important. So I'm thinking, for example, we have an exhibition up right now that's called Back Home Polish Chicago, which was an exhibition I helped on, but was actually, it started all the way back in 2017 through a series of oral histories, and going back to kind of trauma-informed curation was a process of talking about displaced persons in a Polish context. And I was asked to help give perspective into how we might marry both Catholic and Jewish perspectives of displacement in that context. That is not a small task that even the nation of Poland does not have solved, right? Let alone our museum gallery space to be the place where we're not the UN. So we're doing our best to try to address that, but it doesn't change how the process might look. But that being said, coming at the starts of projects and really learning from past projects about what are some of these ways we could best facilitate what we're hearing the need is and what we are identifying the gaps might be. So that way, when it comes to that final end project, that we have the ability to be agile in our responses to the current state, because we thought about this really nice grounding, going back to the grounding knowledge, but, really, because we heard people well at the beginning versus discovering at the end, maybe the places we didn't hear people as well and how we might use that as a learning for the next time. Yeah, so lots of ideas and sparks. We actually have a process where we kind of take them all into a meeting and get a feeling for everybody where it goes from there. But I think close listening would be my kind of jumping off point.
And for me, it's a little bit of everything, really. Sometimes our funders, foundation, or government agencies come to us and say, have you ever thought about these things? We have now some programs protecting and preserving the folk art in the in the north, so in the Minnesota, Dakotas, these little Lutheran churches that were built by Scandinavian and Icelandic and Finnish immigrants, and they have beautiful art. So that was a funder that approached me and said, what about this? Other times it's just pure observation of what you have around you. I'm talking about our last grant program that we have created, the one for Black churches. It really started from the chaos and the injustice and drama of a few years ago, where I said to my colleagues, we need to do something real, not just put out a statement that, like as I call it, choir of deaf people. So, but just let's do something. There was the word I called a very good buddy of mine was the Black preacher, and I said, what Black community needs? And they said, give us the money, give us the power, and don't interfere. And you know what? That was a lesson. And so our grant program is managed by Black folks for Black folks and that kind of thing. I just raised the money, and that's it. So the observation of what's happening around you. And sometimes something that my colleagues bring up to me or I read somewhere and pick my attention, like what I suggested before, putting together this synagogue and this mosque to share the same space. that's something that but I'm inviting, especially the younger the younger colleagues here, be always curious and don't become a fossil of what you like what you do every day. Keep your antennas open and talk to everybody, because everybody, is going to teach you something, or opportunities. Somebody shared with me a sort of proverb I like a lot. It says, the pessimist always thinks that the glass is half empty. The optimist already opened another bottle. And that's really true. And being, a Roman that likes wine, and I think is really true. So keep your eyes open, keep opening bottles. Don't drink and drive, but keep, you know what I mean? Enjoy life.
The practical and intellectual advice there. I appreciate that, Gianfranco. Any final questions? Well, great. Actually, so I was going to ask one more question to sort of wrap everything up, but actually, Rachel asked it, which is sort of how to get into this, which I think the best place to sort of end, to think about this as the start of this kind of work, as opposed to the kind of like recognition of stuff that's already happening. This is a big tent that we hope to sort of bring a lot of folks along, and as you hopefully heard us all say that collaboration is essential to this. So don't hesitate. I mean, I'm sorry to speak for our three panelists, but don't hesitate to reach out to us, because I think that's of interest to all of us, is to sort of, help this work take root in other communities across the country. So Tiffany, do you want to share anything about the next one? Oh, sorry, Rebecca, go ahead.
No, I was just going to add something to my answer, and I didn't want to cut you off, Chris.
No, go ahead.
I realized I answered so specifically in the context of the museum that I wanted to clarify, like in work generally, I'm a big fan of just get started with something that you really care about. And for me, I use the metaphor of something I lose sleep over. Not everyone needs to lose sleep to feel motivated. I am one of those people, however, but it's really the thing that was like, why, like, I don't feel settled until I feel like I'm taking action toward this. And I think for me that, started in one context and has shifted in others. And either way, it's the thing that drives me. And so I want something to feel very demystified. It shouldn't be inaccessible feeling to say, oh, museums are classic for feeling like a very unattainable space to work in. And that has lots of things that we could unpack for probably another hour and a half within it. But the work of caring, preserving, and disseminating history can be done on so many levels in so many ways with very minimal tools, but a lot of solidarity, support, and care. And so I don't want anyone to ever feel like they can't just do it. Anyway, so museum process aside, thank you for my soapbox for 30 seconds, Chris.
No, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. So Tiffany, do you want to say anything about next steps?
I think David had one more question.
Just want to say thank you so much for this. This is so helpful for me to feel like there are other people that are doing similar types of work as I do, and I would love to kind of stay in contact. I have an NEH grant in Philadelphia documenting religious diversity in early Philly, and we're hopefully going to get a second part of the grant. But I would, as we keep developing the project, it would be nice to have us be connected together in some way or some type of an outlet. So just thank you for this.
My office, David, is in Philadelphia, so okay. I don't think there, but I presume the emails, right, Chris and Tiffany, they're going to be shared with the group. So get in touch, and maybe when I'm in Philly, I don't live in Philly, but my office is there. We can get together and maybe talk, or whatever you want.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you, David. This is a perfect segue towards what I was about to say, which is I wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and also to mention, or I had mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that this is the second of a series of 4 webinars. Our third webinar will be Tuesday, January 30th at 1 p.m. Central Time. That one is going to be co-sponsored with ACLS, the American Council of Learned Societies. They have done a lot of work to think about ways to integrate grounded knowledge and public knowledge into both doctoral education, as well as like creating vocational opportunities for PhDs in the humanities in these spaces. So they will be talking about their work at that webinar. And then our fourth one is, we haven't scheduled an exact date yet. We think it will likely be in April. And that one is going to focus more on the relationship building and the ethics that come along with trying to do that kind of mutually beneficial work that we're all engaged in. We have your emails from registering through Zoom. We will send an email to everyone. Also, this is recorded and everything is going on YouTube, so you can go back to these videos. We'll share the YouTube links. We'll tell you about the next webinars. We're also, through the Grounded Knowledge Project, developing a resource website that will highlight you'll be able to find the recordings of the webinars. We will have links to some resources in this kind of grounded knowledge space. We're doing a mapping project in which we're trying to map some kind of best practices or models or exciting projects in these spaces, so you can find other like-minded people. And we hope that it can be a place too where people can connect with one another. So stay tuned for all of that information. And thank you again for joining us today. And we hope we see you next time.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure indeed. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.